Hey all, WebCamParrot here, with a video on the different kinds of superpowers that exist in fiction. I think we are all a little bit familiar with what it's like to talk to your buddies about who would win in a fight, and there are lots of different considerations that go into these kind of discussions. So for this video, I thought it would be fun if I just sort of ranked and explained all of the different kinds of abilities or superpowers that a character could have that would be relevant to one of these discussions. First, some disclaimers. I'm not going to be talking about what people sometimes call reality warping or toon force. Not because these things don't exist in fiction, they do exist, but it's unclear what these abilities actually do, and I sort of just consider them to be variations of some other superpower. Let's say Mixie uses his powers to turn you into a game piece. I just consider that a form of transmutation. Or let's say that Tom from Tom and Jerry gets torn apart and then is then able to cartoonishly recover himself off screen. That's just a type of regeneration. An odd kind of regeneration, I'll give you that, but still just regeneration. I really just think, reality warping and toon force, they're like methods for performing certain superpowers. They're not themselves powers. They're some sort of like meta thing. I don't know what the proper word for that would be. But people use toon force to produce certain effects. And it's not that toon force is itself its sort of own well-defined thing. Another problem of a similar vein is things like adaptation or power mimicry, which I'm not going to be talking about either, just because these are simply ways that characters acquire their abilities. Just because a character can copy someone else's power to time travel, for instance, doesn't mean that they could just copy mind control or something like that. So it's not really possible to rank it fairly. And I just think that if you have adaptation or power mimicry, great. It means that you have more abilities than other people would have, and that's already sort of factored in here. I also won't be talking about immortality, because it's not really clear, again, what it is, and is more easily explained by things like regeneration, resurrection, or invulnerability. Because, if you're immortal, but you can't regenerate, you can't resurrect yourself, and you're not invulnerable, then you're basically dead. I mean, you can't do anything. If you've got no body, you can't regenerate it, you can't resurrect yourself, you don't have an invulnerable body. What's the point in being immortal, right? So it's not really a power. It just, again, is like a set of other powers. Also, sorry to those of you all who are big fans of fungus manipulation or whatever, but I'm not going to count highly obscure or basically irrelevant powers. Feel free to leave a comment with your favourite obscure power down below, though. Personally, I'm a big fan of animal telepathy. Very overpowered, that one. So I'm just going to go through, I've got my tier list here, what is becoming go alphabetically here through different powers I have here. So firstly, we've got absolute zero. So this is like a character who can make things so cold that they're reduced to absolute zero. Or in some cases, it can actually be below absolute zero. And it's really hard to figure out what this really means in a superpower context, because we don't know what happens in real life at zero energy states. But it has a profound effect on atomic structure. I mean, there's no energy in any of the atomic structure of the thing you're affected. And so it's actually this really dangerous, sort of reality-breaking thing, almost. And it's an instant win. I mean, if you get hit with absolute zero and you don't have some kind of resistance to it, you're not a character that has resisted absolute zero before, you are done. You're gone. So I'm going to put this in B. Which hopefully gives you guys a good appreciation of what's to come here, if that counts as a B. And also, for this list, things that are further to the left are better in their respective tier. Next, I've got absorption. So absorption is, and I've used Boo as the picture here, is like a character who sucks you into their body, and then you become a part of them. So it's not the same as like life drain or something, or energy drain, which I've listed as a separate thing. It's more like the opposite twin to possession, right? When you possess somebody, like when a ghost possesses somebody, it takes their body, roughly speaking, and puts it in their target's body. They go inside their body and then they control it from the inside. But absorption puts someone else inside your body and then makes them a part of you. And I mean, this is also an instant win, but it has some other criteria that make it harder to perform. So you normally have to, touch them or get in physical contact with them or engulf them, and characters usually have the opportunity to get away from this or resist this. And also, it's surprisingly common for characters to resist this ability. And I mean, using the example of Boo, Goku and Vegeta, end up being absorbed by Boo, and they're able to like sort of resist it. And we don't usually think of Dragon Ball characters as like having lots of resistances. So this one I'm going to put in D. Pretty good, but and absorption is also nice because it can get around things like regeneration, resurrection, invulnerability, things like this that are pretty useful for not losing a fight. Same with Absolute Zero, by the way. I mean, it's pretty hard to regenerate from having all the energy in your body taken away because it's so cold. Next up, we have age manipulation. So age manipulation is a really interesting one, and it's part of, there's sort of this suite of powers that come under time manipulation, and this is one of them. And age manipulation is a lot better than it sounds at first glance, because there's two ways that it's really dangerous. I mean, you can age somebody so extremely that they just turn to dust or turn to old age. They die of old age, right? But you can also reduce people to just being like babies or something like that, to infants who are weak and easy to defeat. And so it can make people, it can reduce people's stats by making them like young infants, and it can also just age them to death. If it's much more common for characters to be resistant to aging, like we can think of characters who don't age, who are immortal, for instance, who aren't going to be worried about like aging thousands of years or millions of years or whatever, however long you want to say. And there are also, coincidentally, some characters who simply, there's no point in their past when they were weak. Robots might just come out of the factory exactly as strong, at their peak strength. Cosmic beings, gods and things, maybe at no point were infants, and so it doesn't matter that you can age them backwards. Having said that, it's a really obscure ability that's quite difficult to resist, and it's comparable to some other abilities that we'll see later. So I'm going to put it in A. Next, I have BFR Local. And I've used a picture of Jupiter to hopefully give an idea of what this really means. It basically, BFR is short for Battlefield Removal. And it just stands for taking someone and putting them so far away that they can't really participate in the fight anymore, and they're never going to ever be a threat to you again. So, if I was fighting, I don't know, Brad Pitt, and I teleported him to the moon, I probably don't ever have to deal with Brad Pitt again. There's no way for him to get back by himself. And so the fight is over. I'm taking BFR Local to just mean any battlefield removal that takes place in the same universe as you are. And it is an instant win, but it's not as good as a lot of other abilities, because there are lots of characters who can come back from even being teleported to a different planet or across the universe just because they can fly or they can teleport themselves. And so, mundane like flight can sort of, and obviously the ability to survive in a vacuum and fly through space, and you'd have to be fast enough to get back in a relevant time frame and stuff like this. But yeah, that's reasonably common. So even though it's an instant win, which is, I take to be quite serious, although lots of the things on this list are going to be instant wins if you don't resist them, it's pretty easy for characters to have answers to this. And so I'm going to put that into E. Next up is the same thing, but involves taking someone and putting them in another realm. So in another universe or another reality or something like this. And this is the most obvious case for what we might call in hacks potency. So, if I send you to the next universe over, that's pretty different from sending you outside of like the infinite multiverse. But for these purposes, I'm not considering potency for any of these abilities. Because if I did, they would all go in S, because any of them could be good enough to just be so powerful, so extremely good in the thing that they do, that they would be better than any other ability, and it would be impossible to rate them. So I'm just taking them all as they are. I think that teleporting someone else to another realm is considerably better than just teleporting them somewhere else in the universe, to another planet or another galaxy or something like that, because in order to get back, you need dimensional travel or something like this. Pretty unusual for characters to have that, and so I'm going to put it in D. Still below absorption, though. The final type of battlefield removal I want to talk about is temporal battlefield removal, which, again, is like part of the set of powers that come under time manipulation, but I think it's important to separate them out because they do operate very differently, and different characters may not have all of these abilities. They might have some of them and not others. And this involves either sending somebody, for instance, so far into the past that they die before they ever meet you, so they're no longer a threat, right? Or sending someone to, for instance, the end of time, where they have no way of getting back and they're just trapped there forever and they're done. And I mean, to get out of this, you basically just need time travel, or this effect just needs to not work on you for some reason. But that's really, really weird. I can't think of like a single case where someone trying to send someone else through time just didn't work for some reason. Normally, somebody has to also have time travel to get back, or they avoid being hit by it. And I think this is a really, really impressive ability, because not many characters have ways around this type of effect. Again, because it's got like this dual purpose. You can send someone to the beginning of time or the end of time, and there are different requirements for surviving them. I mean, if you're an immortal person and you get sent 1,000,000 years into the past, you might be like, great, I get 1,000,000 years to prepare for this guy who's going to come fight me, right? But being sent to the end of time, that's pretty harsh. I mean, there's not a lot of obvious, just sort of historical facts about a character like them being immortal that are going to change things, or them being a robot or something. And so I think this is right at the top of A. Really, really impressive. Next up, we have black hole creation, which, I mean, it just sort of is what it sounds like. The ability to use black holes as part of your attacks. And it's weirdly similar to abilities that utilize absolute zero, because it affects things on such a fundamental level that the differences in the spatial fabric, like the way that black holes pull things in, on the most fine levels, like in very small black holes at least, as you're approaching them, because they warp space so much, the differences between two areas of space are actually like smaller than your atoms, and so you get torn apart on this really fundamental level. And on top of this, as you approach a black hole, because they pull in faster than at the speed of light, there's no conceivable way to sort of find your way out, and it means that this is going to sound like really too complex. I'm like drawing on my background in physics here and trying not to make it sound so insane nobody can tell what I'm talking about. But there are these things called world lines that you would draw through space and time. You might talk about the way an apple exists in the world, and an apple is moving through time and it's moving through space as well when it gets moved around. And in black holes, all world lines trend towards the center. It's like a one-dimensional world. Like everything about your world becomes one-dimensional, and then you end up sort of in a zero-dimensional place. So it's even worse than just like really fundamental sort of atomic destruction. It's really actually, when you think about it, difficult thing to deal with. And one of the only ways to really deal with it is just to show that you can handle black holes. I mean, Superman can like fly into black holes in some iterations, and I think Silver Surfer has done this and things like that. Mario has swam out of black holes which is a bit ridiculous, but he has done it. So, and I think it's comparable to absolute zero, but it's even worse. So I think it's right above absolute zero. Next up, we've got causality manipulation, which sounds super OP, and it is. And I want to differentiate it here from something like fate manipulation, because that is like something I take to be a separate thing and will come up later. Causality manipulation comes in a variety of different forms. I've used a picture of Gold Experience Requiem here, whose ability is to reverse events that have just happened back to their source. So let's say somebody pulled out a gun and they shot it at you. Well, you could reverse events. You could reverse causality so that like the bullet goes back in their gun and it's like they never fired it, right? So that's a really strong defensive ability. But it can have other consequences as well. There are some versions of causality manipulation, thinking of like Gale Bolg in Fate, where the cause and the effect are reversed. So the effect happens before the cause. So when somebody wants to stab you with this spear, you get stabbed, and then they try to stab you with it. And it means that you basically just get hit guaranteed, unless you have some very, very strange existence that doesn't operate under normal causal rules. And that is really powerful and hard to deal with. Along with this, there are causal manipulators that can like mean that an effect doesn't always come from the cause you'd expect it to. So I don't know, somebody fires their gun at you, and instead it just like turns into magma, right? Because the system of cause and effect is sort of being changed directly. And I actually can't think of any characters that can really actually do that, but it is sort of a conceivable ability. And yeah, it's a really intense ability, but in most iterations, it's just defensive. Some versions of it are offensive, and they're really rare. If they were more common, I would put it higher, but I actually think that it's worse than both age manipulation and BFR through time, because certain characters like Gold Experience Requiem, even though they can like reverse all the attacks that come at them, it doesn't give them a way to win. It's just a stalling tactic. And it's only up there so high because of how absolute this defense is, and because some variations of this ability are instant wins. Next up, we have cloning, which I think is just sort of an obvious thing. Making clones of yourself, specifically. And, I mean, potentially clones of others as well. This is okay, but, if I had to choose between being 1,000 times stronger, it's probably better, or 1,000 times faster, or something like this. Cloning is nice, but it's not going to overcome really big differences in strength or speed, and it's certainly, not comparable to any of the things we've talked about here, which do just like instantly win things for you. So it's nice, it's convenient, and some characters can make infinite clones of themselves and stuff like that, and that's pretty intense. But for those reasons, it's not an instant win. There are ways of dealing with it. It's pretty limited. I'm going to put it in E. And some people can make clones that aren't as strong as themselves as well, so it's not always quite as excellent. Oh god. The next one is conceptual hacks, conceptual manipulation, which is a tough one to explain. And it's not like a lot of the other things I've talked about here. So many of these other abilities could have the prefix conceptual, And what I mean by that is, imagine that there's some version of your character that exists outside of space, time, souls and minds, and there's some universal law that dictates the way that character can be. There's a conceptual version of of Boo out there, let's say. There's a version of him out there that says what he's allowed to be like. And some characters are able to directly influence these sort of really fundamental laws that determine what Boo is even allowed to be like. And if you're able to, for instance, age that thing, make that thing, that blueprint that makes Boo possible, if you're able to make that thing like a baby or really old with your age manipulation, that is just better than your normal age manipulation, right? Some characters are able to attack somebody else's concept, and if that gets destroyed, I mean, it's hard to even say what it means to be you anymore. If that is destroyed, you should have just ceased to exist in an incredibly fundamental way. And so I don't think this is going to be controversial. It's clearly just an S tier ability, and it's more something that makes other abilities better, and that makes it weird. But it deserves to be on here, just because I think it's fair to talk about it. Next up, we've got death hacks, which is more or less exactly what it sounds like. The death note. Somebody writes your name in the death note, you die. It just makes you die. Some characters like Darth Nihilus, kill people just by being near him, stuff like that. Lots of JRPG characters have death spells that just kill people instantly. Nasty, nasty, nasty ability. It's an instant win if it works on them. But you'd be surprised at the number of characters that actually have resistances to this sort of thing. I mean, characters who can't really conventionally die. I mean, if you're an undead, if you're a zombie or a skeleton, it doesn't really make sense to subject you to death again. I don't think the death note would work on a zombie, it probably wouldn't work on a robot or something like that. Some death hacks can work on these things, but generally speaking, there are like mundane facts about a character's life that can make death hacks not work. And on top of this, there are lots of characters that actually do just straight up resist death hacks. A great example of that is like the big bosses in your favorite JRPG. There's death hacks in Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy and stuff, but you can't use it to kill the final boss, typically. Things like that. So even though it sounds like crazy strong, actually only at the top of B, I would say. But yeah, definitely an excellent ability. Next up, we have dimensional manipulation, which is a weird thing to talk about. And in this context, it means taking a character and making them lower dimensional so that they can't attack you. They can't affect you, and it's easy for you to get rid of them. One of the weirdest examples of this, and I don't know why this happens, but in Yu-Gi-Oh! Somebody turns Kaiba 2D, and he actually just breaks out of it with his willpower. So Kaiba resists this ability for some reason. And there are other characters like Annihilus in Marvel who can make people 2D, and then you just can't really fight back against them. I say Annihilus, but it's like Doom with Annihilus's staff is able to do this. And this is an instant win ability, like many of the others, but it's just so rare and hard to deal with that I actually think that it's the best sort of typical instant win ability that is just like, like death hacks isn't defensive, it just kills you. Same with dimensional manipulation. It's not really defensive, you kind of just win. I mean, it's kind of defensive because they can't fight back, but it's just a win button. And I think it's an S tier ability. It's the best of those kind of things. I said that weirdly, but it's good. It's hard to resist. Not many people do. And it works on a really fundamental level. I mean, it's literally changing like the spatial organization of your existence. So, yeah, pretty intense. Next up, we have durability negation, which can take lots of different forms, and it's maybe I should have split it up like I have with some of the other abilities here, like I did with battlefield removal, but I've just decided to keep it as one thing and talk about it in a more general sense. And durability negation just generally involves bypassing a character's normal ability to withstand attacks. And good examples of this are, for instance, you might have attacks that are so small, like maybe I shoot something as small as an atom at you, and if it hits you, you you just explode or something. If you have a shield made of I don't know, metal, my little atom attack might just go right through the shield. It might slip through gaps in the atoms in the shield and hit you anyway. That's the general idea of durability negation. And really good durability negation cuts like through space and time itself, like on a fundamental level, and just it doesn't care about how tough you are. It just separates you in space and time itself. And yeah, this is just a really potent ability for instantly like removing somebody or ignoring their durability. It doesn't matter how powerful they are, right? Like they're done. This is good. It isn't, you know, like many of these things. I mean, hacks kind of implies instant win, right? But it is an instant win. But characters that can resist being attacked that fundamentally, like having their atoms messed with or having themselves messed with, like in a fundamental sense of space and time, or having something like regeneration, you know, is going to stop this. And for that reason, I think it's only in B, around the middle of B. It's kind of similar to things like Absolute Zero and Black Hole Creation, because those are similar, you know, they ignore your durability as well. They just affect you on such a fundamental level that your normal defenses, unless you can prove would prevent this, aren't going to do anything. Next up, we have Energy Drain, which, I mean, is exactly what it sounds like. We've got a picture of Parasite there, but there are lots of characters that can do this. I mean, Silver Surfer can do this, Thor can do this, others that aren't occurring to me at this exact moment. And any time you've played a video game, I don't know, you have a sword that when you hit somebody, it heals you, right? There you go, Energy Drain. In its best sense, it takes away your opponent's ability to withstand attacks because it makes them weaker, and it makes you more powerful. And again, you know, it doesn't matter how durable you are, having your life sucked out of you is just going to put you down eventually. Now, most of the time it's not an instant win. It just gives you an edge. And also, if somebody's energy is like so intense, like if they're really powerful, you would have to show that your character's energy drain is good enough to be relevant here. You know, that it can absorb that much energy. Parasite has had this problem, for instance. He tried to absorb Kismet's energy, and it just made him go really insane, and it would have eventually killed him if he had drained too much of it. And he has this problem with Superman sometimes as well. So I'm going to put it in C, the first thing in C tier. Actually at the very bottom of C. Next up, we have Erasure. So, Erasure is how do I talk about Erasure? It's more fundamental than affecting your atoms, right? You don't exist anymore, and it's worse than death hacks, because at least if you're dead, you can resurrect yourself, for instance. Or you may have your physical body still. You've just been technically put in a state of death. If you've been erased, you're not even dead. You know, don't go to heaven, don't go to hell, don't go to the afterlife. Simply gone. And I've got a Kai here to represent it, which is, I think, a famous example of existence erasure. And it can have various degrees. I mean, some existence erasure merely physically erases you. Some existence erasure gets rid of your mind, body, and soul. And that does affect how good it is, but I'm just taking the weakest version of it to be that at least your entire body is totally erased from existence. And of course, you know, it must be better than death hacks. I think it's resisted less often than death hacks. It gets around a lot of the things that death hacks can't get around, like resurrection. And so I'm going to put it into A, about midway through A. Next up, we have fate or probability manipulation, which sort of end up being the same thing. And I want to draw a bit of a distinction between fate manipulation and plot manipulation, which is going to come up later as well, because they are different. Fate manipulation or probability manipulation is about being able to determine what the next event is like. And also generally being able to tell what that event is going to be. So Yuha is, the poster child that you watch. I don't know, whatever his name is supposed to really be. I have no idea. Is the poster child of this because he's able to switch to whatever timeline. He can see many timelines, many possible timelines. And he just chooses to exist in whatever timeline he thinks has the best results for him. If he sees that there's a timeline where somebody is able to defeat him in the future, he just chooses not to live in that one. Some other characters are sort of like this in 40k as well. The Emperor and Eldrad are able to see the strings of fate so intensely that they merely just choose to live very simplistic, in very simple ways. They choose to live such that their future will be a certain way. And I think this is like absolutely an S tier ability. It has everything that like causality manipulation has, but it's just better generally because it totally controls like what's going to happen next, rather than just messing with cause and effect. And I think this is absolutely an S tier ability. Granted, still below conceptual hacks. Next up, we have illusions. Illusions are nice. I mean, being able to trick your opponents, being able to show them, things that they can't normally see is good, but it doesn't automatically win anything, and it actually offers like quite a minimal advantage. So, yeah, it's sort of like one of the worst superpowers or hacks, and I think it belongs in F. It's nice to have, and some characters have quite powerful versions of it. I mean, I've got a picture of Aizen there, who does have particularly good illusions, but it doesn't allow him to win on its own. It's just something really nice to have, and hopefully you're able to utilize, like, the perceptual advantage that it gives you over your opponent. Next up, we have invisibility, which is kind of just like a worse version of illusions. I mean, illusions can control like everything that the other person can see, and invisibility just makes you hard to see. Again, really useful for getting surprise attacks on people, for attacking their weak spots, for instance, or readying up, whatever special attack you have when they can't see you. But if another character is just way stronger than you and you can't hurt them, this isn't going to be the deciding factor. Same with illusions. It's not going to allow you to defeat somebody that you can't even hurt. So for that reason, I think it's another F tier ability just below illusions. Next up, we've got intangibility, which basically is things like ghosts. But I mean, the Flash does this too. Some characters are able to manipulate their body so that normal atoms, normal matter can't interact with them, and it just goes through. Dania can turn himself into mist, and if you've ever tried to beat up a cloud or a cloud of smoke, it's very difficult / impossible without specific tools, I guess. And some characters can use their intangibility to reach inside of other characters and attack them from the inside. So the Flash and Reverse Flash, they can do this. Reverse Flash just vibrates his hand through your body and then squeezes your heart or whatever directly. So you kind of ignore, however tough you are on the outside, it doesn't matter. And this is pretty good. I mean, being intangible just sort of means people can't attack you. And I think this is, it's solid, but it's not an automatic win most of the time. Better versions of it do allow you to get a good chance to win, by attacking someone on the inside of their body. But yeah, I think this is in pretty squarely in E tier. I'm looking at my notes. That's why I'm doubting myself. My notes are weird. Yeah. No, I've messed this up. Because absorption is definitely better than energy drain. What am I doing? Yeah, I misread my notes. Okay, good. This makes sense. Makes sense now? Does this make sense? This is here too. Oh my god. Yeah. There we go. Look, I'm competent, I promise. Like, this is complicated, okay? Like, all these abilities I got here, I gotta remember everything. I thought about them when I put them in this list. You know, shut up, don't leave a comment about it. Okay. So, intangibility, yeah, I think intangibility goes in D. It's slightly better than teleporting someone else to a different planet or somewhere else in the universe. Invulnerability, which sounds like it would be an insanely strong ability, right? It sounds like it would be really good. Almost nobody has this, because normally things that we would think of as invulnerability are usually just like power-ups that make them physically stronger, like that make their body harder to hurt, but not actually invulnerable. For instance, when Mario picks up the star power-up, it kind of looks like he might be invulnerable, but then it may just be that his durability gets much higher, and you'd need like hard proof that it actually is invulnerability, as in their body can't be harmed. There's some sort of rule about their body that prevents it from being harmed. Which, yeah, again, it sounds good, but if you really think about it, it's just worse than intangibility. I mean, intangibility means you can't be hit at all, just like invulnerability, but you can pass through attacks, you can maybe attack people from the inside, you can take strange routes, like you could maybe dip into the ground to surprise somebody and things like that. And invulnerability doesn't have any of these things. So it actually goes in E, which is probably surprising to a lot of you. Next up, we have law manipulation. Law manipulation is an obscure as hell, hard to understand superpower, and it could do basically anything, and that makes it weird to talk about because however good it ends up being depends on what it does. The main example, so I was talking to some of my friends about this list, my friend Gotang and Saiboshi, and Sawasi, we talked about some of the placements here, and the big one that came up that we thought was probably law manipulation was Midora and his Minority World, and the person that he copies it from, which, oh my god, I can't remember his name. Anyway, in Toriko, there's a law manipulation ability that means that your body starts. There's a law that gets written into the world that says, your body takes the most unlikely course of action. All your atoms, the minority and the majority, are flipped. Your atoms have certain probabilities about where they're going to be and what they're going to do, and also your cells do about how they're going to breathe. And it basically makes everything that would go wrong. All the unlikely things happen, and all of the likely things don't happen. Which can be really, really powerful. And it's most characters, try and think of a character that resists law manipulation. It's pretty hard. I'd be interested to see if people could come up with any examples. Here I've got Nicol Bolas, who has pretty good law manipulation. He's like able to create worlds and determine what the rules are like there, where people go when they die, what kind of magic people are allowed to do and stuff like that. And there are characters in Magic the Gathering that can resist law manipulation as well. But yeah, it's super unusual. And for that reason, I think it goes up here in B. It can be an instant win. Generally, it's not an instant win, but it's just so hard to resist. And normally, it just sets up conditions that if you're not able to deal with them, you're probably in a lot of trouble anyway. Next up, we've got mind control / like destruction. I mean, like destroying somebody's mind also is an instant win as well as controlling them. I mean, really, really good. Again, it's another one of these things where if you just control someone's mind, I mean, what are they going to do? It doesn't matter how strong they are if they can't control their own body. That's just a loss for them. But it's a really common thing for characters to be able to pretty comfortably deal with mind control. And so lots of characters resist it. Superman resists it, Goku resists it. We see Vegeta resist the margin mark thing. Uh, Bobobo resists it. I don't know why I said that. Bobobo resists everything. But yeah, it's really common. Characters can often just break out of mind control with their willpower or whatever. You know, if they're just a really strong-willed person, sometimes it doesn't work on them, and that makes it not great. So I think that it goes pretty squarely into C. Next up, speaking of Bobo, we've got plot manipulation, which a big part of what plot manipulation is exactly the same as fate manipulation. And I think a lot of plot manipulation and fate manipulation could basically be said to be the same thing. It's the ability to determine what's going to happen next. In this case, what happens next in the story. Or also, things that happened in a character's past. Bobobo is like very well known for changing characters' backstories to make them vulnerable to certain attacks or to hurt them in the present. And it is really difficult to think about how somebody could even conceivably deal with this. And so that's one like obvious version of plot manipulation, but it comes in other forms as well. Again, another example from Bobobo. Torpedo Girl just decides that she doesn't like the villain she's fighting's, main attack, their big special attack, and so she just crumples up the page and throws it away, so it doesn't work. So plot manipulation has like a wide variety of abilities, and also it tends to be able to replicate other abilities here in a way that's even harder to deal with. So, like changing somebody's past, well, you could do that with time travel, but even if you had time travel, you wouldn't be able to deal with plot manipulation, because it's not your actual past that's changed, it's your story. And if, the story dictates that that's the way it is, it doesn't matter if you tried to go back and change it. And I think this is pretty plainly the best superpower to have. Obviously, it can be really weak as well. I mean, if you just have the plot power to have an orange in your hand whenever you want, like, whatever, like, because your character, like, is like that, Mr. Orange McOrangeton or whatever, he has a special part of his story is that he always ends up with an orange in his hand, let's say. I don't know. Like, it just doesn't, that's not, if I have a big stick, I'm going to beat Orange Man just by sheer force. But typically, plot manipulation tends to be really, really strong, really difficult to deal with. And again, it's kind of like conceptual manipulation as well. Like, it has its own unique forms too. It's not just an affix, but it can replicate a lot of these other abilities in strange ways. Next up, we've got poison or disease, and I would also encompass like viruses and bacterial stuff. Poison, some poison makes you sick, some poison blinds you, some poison disorients you, some poison kills you. Some really intense poisons, like, I don't know, in Elden Ring, can even affect you on a very fundamental level. But the fact is just that poison is not usually that common of a thing or to be like super effective. Like, for instance, if you're a robot, right, poison just doesn't work on you. And characters often are just, through grit and determination, able to overcome poison for whatever reason. Naruto is like this, right? Like, he's got, I suppose that's more because of the Ninetales power within him, but it's just the poison from right at the beginning of the manga, right? When he gets scratched, it heals more quickly on him. The poison didn't really affect him. Goku in the original manga drinks the super divine water, which would kill anybody else, and just because he's tough enough, like, it doesn't kill him. Although he did get heart disease, which would have killed him. So whatever. Let's not praise Goku too much in this video. Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's nice to have poison. It can be interesting as well to see how it interacts with certain characters, but I think it's right at the bottom of it. Next up, we've got possession, which I already talked about possession being very similar to absorption, and it's basically the other side of absorption. I think it's a little bit worse than absorption because, again, kind of like with mind control, characters can sometimes just resist possession thanks to brute willpower. Or, you're a robot, and then there's nothing to possess, perhaps. Sometimes possession works on characters that don't have souls as well. You know, you take control, you put your soul in the robot, now you control the robot, something like that. And sometimes, you know, it requires them to have a soul for you to latch onto, for instance. I think it's slightly worse than absorption because it doesn't power you up. I mean, it gives you control of their body, but absorption just like brings someone else inside your body. But they're basically the same thing, ultimately. Next up, we've got power nullification, which can come in a number of forms. It can come in the form of, I don't think you should be able to do death hacks, right? I have a thing that means you can't do death hacks. I have a stick. When you're near the stick, death hacks doesn't work, for instance. That's one type of power null. But another type of power null tends to involve something like, I make you as weak as a normal person, you know, or as strong as an ant, or something like that. And then you're just incredibly easy to defeat. And so, not only can it sort of cut down your opponent at the level of like the abilities that they are able to use, but it can also just give you free wins as well. And I think that just makes it better than most of these other abilities that are up for consideration as instant wins. And also, like, I don't know, power null tends to be pretty good where it does show up. It tends to be pretty, like, I've got Khan there, and anything that's not considered fair martial combat does not work on Khan. Obviously, it doesn't just work on anything. You'd have to be able to show that in Warhammer 40k that ability existed, and that in principle it wouldn't work on Khan for that reason. But he can more or less just negate anything that's not considered fair. And yeah, so it's defensive, it's offensive, it shuts down another character's abilities. Really, really good. Pretty close to the top of A. And I did mean to do this in alphabetical order. I've messed that up now. So, because matter manipulation is not in the right place. So we're going to put matter manipulation in next. Matter manipulation is being able to directly affect the stuff that someone is made up of. Maybe you can reorganize their molecules or directly destroy their molecules, or maybe you can do things even more fundamentally to like their atoms or their subatomic particles like quarks or whatever, or even more fundamental than that, like basic field wave interactions, or whatever other sort of hocus pocus thing your particular setting has. And, I mean, we can compare it to some of the other things here. I mean, it's very similar to black hole creation and absolute zero and durability negation, right? But it tends to be better than them because you can, like, reformulate people's bodies into different things. And, you know, even if you resist being destroyed on that level, let's say you have regeneration, being turned into a lamp might still suck for you. I mean, you're not technically hurt, so what's to regenerate, right? Some regeneration can deal with matter manipulation, though, but it's just a really fundamental form of destruction, and it manipulates like quite fundamental things about you. And here I've got a picture of Dr. Manhattan matter manipulating Rorschach out of existence, which goes here. Next up, we have precognition. Precognition is being able to tell what's going to happen next, seeing the future, right? Being able to tell what's going to happen next, which is surprisingly relevant. It's a really good thing to have if, for instance, your character is fighting somebody and they have the necessary ability to beat their opponent instantly, but they don't know exactly which one it is. And so maybe, you know, they're going through testing what works and they lose before they find out. Precognition means that they will know what they need to do to win. Precognition can also mean that you know what your opponent is going to do and where they're going to attack, and you can just not be there. I already talked about 40k's Eldrad, whose precognition is so good that it basically becomes fate manipulation. He'll just do absurd things like he'll pick up a rock and move it, and one of his friends or allies will be like, "Why did you do that?" And he's like, "Don't worry about it." And 200 years later, some Imperial ship lands there, slips on the rock, blows up, and kills some important political figure that Eldrad knew was going to be there 200 years in advance, right? Just totally nuts. Precognition can get totally nuts, but generally, it's quite mundane. You might just see little flickers of the future, and even when it's quite good and reliable, like the Sharingan, it's just a little bit of forewarning. It just helps you just that little bit. And so I think it's a D tier ability, just above intangibility. Because when it's really good, it's pretty similar to intangibility. I mean, you're just never where your opponent's going to attack you, and so they can never hit you. Next up, we have radioactivity, which is kind of like a better version of poison. I mean, I could have lumped it into poison, but I decided to separate them because radioactivity, it breaks down your cells directly. And that can, again, it's like a type of durability negation. It's sort of reducible to some of these other abilities, to be fair, but I think it's worth talking about on its own terms. Just because some characters have radioactivity and not other kinds of things you'd expect. And it kills people slowly, It slowly wears them down until they would basically, what happens to humans is organ failure, right? Massive organ failure. It destroys your genes, it tears apart your genes and your cells and your genetic information. And you can have really, really tough skin, and it might not matter. Radioactive particles might just make you sick and eventually get rid of you anyway. Pretty good, but not an instant win, and I think it ends up in D. Next up, we've got, I'm going to do this one first, regular regeneration, and I've got a picture of Cell here, and what I'm sort of envisioning is like somebody blows you up with a bomb, and you just grow back together. Some regeneration is worse than this. I already talked about Naruto sort of healing his wounds over faster than a normal person, but not really in a super relevant way. I'm thinking of better regeneration than that. I'm thinking of Boo and Cell and maybe like Deadpool and Wolverine, who can come back from like really, really pretty insane situations where they're like a single drop of blood or a single cell or turned into smoke or something. Like totally vaporized into smoke and can still come back. Again, like very comparable to a lot of these other things like invulnerability and intangibility and precognition, because it just prevents physical attacks from working on you. Unfortunately, it's easier to bypass than most of those things because you can just like trap somebody when they're regenerating or find ways to attack them that they can't regenerate from. There's different levels to regeneration as well. And so I think this goes in. I think it's worse than invulnerability because it's better to just not be hurt in the first place. And again, like, cloning, if there's two of me, that's kind of not that, in a weird way, it's similar to regeneration. Because just destroying one of my bodies isn't enough. Much like with regeneration, just destroying my body's not enough. I'm just going to come back. If I can keep making clones, I get a similar result to normal regeneration, but I get the benefit of also becoming more powerful because there's more of me. Next up, we've got regenerating from erasure. So, we can already see how matter manipulation is not going to be enough here. Durability negation is not going to be enough. Absolute zero is not going to be enough to deal with this. Many of the abilities here, radioactivity is not going to be enough to deal with this. It doesn't matter what happens to you. You can literally just be totally erased and come back with no problem. Granted, has no offensive prowess whatsoever, so I don't think it's as high as some of these others. Like, I don't think it's as high as erasure, even though it beats it for that reason. But it does allow you to just ignore most of what someone else wants to do to you. And much like erasure, it has different degrees. Maybe you can only regenerate your physical body. Maybe you can regenerate your mind and soul as well. But generally, I think it goes around the middle of B. Next up, we have resurrection. Another, again, sort of like a regeneration ability. It just means, you die and you're able to come back to life. And I've used Doomsday here as a good representation of this. And you might have this ability even if you can't regenerate. But a lot of characters that do, like, also have regeneration. And yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of, you can see how a lot of the things here get around resurrection. I mean, if somebody can just teleport you to a different planet, who cares if you can resurrect? You're not coming back. If someone can possess your body, doesn't matter if you can resurrect. You're done. Someone takes control of your mind, it doesn't matter. You might think that life drain could also beat someone that can resurrect, or absorption. And so it doesn't end up that high, even though, we think of being able to resurrect yourself at will like a really, really powerful ability. But surprisingly, it actually doesn't stack up as well as you'd think. And it goes about here, right at the top of D. Next up, I have Sealing. Sealing is quite comparable to Power Null, and it feels very similar to Power Null, and the way that I think it's different is that Sealing is more like putting somebody in something that is just too difficult for them to get out of. So, if I stuffed you in a steel crate, it's not like I made you weaker, I didn't nullify your powers, it's just that you're not strong enough to get out. And it often comes with Power Null as well, but it's just very, very similar to Power Null. It removes somebody from the situation, and if they can never get out, they've effectively lost. Don't think it's as good as sending somebody back in time or something, though. But it's pretty unusual to resist Sealing. And when people do resist Sealing, it's normally just because they're too strong. If I put the Hulk in a steel box, that doesn't matter. He's just going to break out. But actually not being affected by Sealing is very strange, and lots of Sealing seals away your soul or your mind, or it seals you away in some magical way that doesn't have anything to do with how powerful you are, and you just need to not be affected by Sealing to get out of it. Next up we have Sleep, putting people to sleep. Nice, it gives you a free hit, right? Pretty similar to Invisibility. I think it's a little bit worse than Invisibility, because Invisibility denies your opponent information. And some characters can do things whilst they're asleep as well. It can be pretty mundane to get someone to wake you up. Obviously, really good sleep manipulation can just put people to sleep for eternity and stuff. But generally, it's not that good. It's okay. It's like I'm saying it's the worst ability here. I'm saying it's the worst superpower, but yeah, it can still help you win a fight you would otherwise never win. Next up, we have soul manipulation, and more specifically, controlling someone else's soul or destroying it. So I've got Ghost Rider here. He can rip people's souls out of their bodies or totally destroy their souls. Generally speaking, if somebody doesn't have their soul, we wouldn't expect them to do anything. They would lose control of their body, and yeah, they'd be out of it. Kind of like mind control, and souls and minds in many fictional settings are just treated as the same thing. But they're not always the same, and resisting soul manipulation is somewhat rarer than resisting mind control, and for that reason, I think it is better, but it's in the same tier. I think it's basically at the top of C tier, just because of, again, its rarity. Next up, we've got spatial manipulation, and, the iconic representative of this ability is Gojo. Another good one is Accelerator. And what I'm envisioning as spatial manipulation here, to sort of separate it from things like black hole creation and matter manipulation, is I'm literally just talking about characters who can change the way that things move through space. So Gojo is able to prevent things from ever reaching him. Accelerator is able to control vectors. He can decide where things are going to go, and so things never actually approach him because he just gets to decide where they go. It can often have offensive capabilities. Accelerator can stop all the blood flowing throughout your body, or force it into your heart or something and kill you that way. Gojo has quite a refined way of using his spatial manipulation to sort of tear apart your atoms, and that can be really strong as well. But in the simple form that I'm talking about it, it's just an ability. It's just another one of the abilities that stops another character from hurting you. And I actually think that it's worse than many of the others, because if you're fast enough, it doesn't work on you. And that's, it doesn't matter how fast somebody is. My regen is going to work no matter what, right? It doesn't matter how fast somebody is. My intangibility or my invulnerability or my resurrection, all these things are going to work. Spatial manipulation is unique in that if somebody can just travel far enough, conceptually far enough, to overcome the extended distance you're forcing them to arbitrarily travel with your ability, then it doesn't work. Next up, we have suffocation. Here's a picture from Avatar, Legend of Korra, where in quite a horrible scene, So here, sucks the air out of somebody's lungs. You can't breathe, you can't live. Again, it's another one of those things that it doesn't work on robots. But I think it's better. It's better than poison. Less people resist suffocation than poison. I talked about sort of Goku just being tough enough for poison not to work on him. Like, this logic seems to be a thing in many settings, and that makes it quite common. But people who are able to survive in a vacuum or avoid being drowned, pretty unusual. It's technically a worse version of battlefield removal in the local sense, because I could just battlefield remove somebody into the vacuum of space and they would suffocate. But it's pretty similar to them. It is something that can allow you to win immediately. Somebody suffocates, that's it for them. Slightly worse than radioactivity, because radioactivity is a bit more fundamental of an effect. It affects your cells or more directly. Next up, we've got summoning. Summoning can be amazing if the thing you summon is super scary, or it can really be terrible if the thing you summon is not very scary. I mean, if I summon a Weedle, I've got Pokemon here as the example, who cares about your Weedle, right? But if I summon Dialga, or Rayquaza, or whatever, I'm more scared of that. In this case, we're going to try to bring that back to sort of median, and in that case, it's very similar to cloning. It's kind of like making another version of yourself, except that other version of yourself is somebody else. And yeah, I know that sentence makes no sense, and yet it makes sense, right? It's help. It's bringing in help. It can be good. Generally, it doesn't give you an instant win. And typically speaking, if the thing you're bringing in is really scary, it's probably because it's got some of these abilities up here, right? That's probably why. And so it would be weird to value it similarly to those, because it's dependent on those to be good. Next up, we've got time stop, which is another one of those things that sounds really, really strong and is surprisingly underwhelming. Because you can stop time as much as you want, but if you're not strong enough to defeat the other person you're fighting, it does not matter squat. If you can stop time forever, at least they can't attack you, though. And for that reason, I think it compares somewhat to invulnerability. I mean, you're unable to be attacked. It's similar to invulnerability. It's another one of those things that doesn't work on someone if they're fast enough. Because time stop basically means that you have to move in 0 time to deal with it, unless you resist time stop. And some characters are that fast, like the Flash, just is that fast. And so time stop doesn't work on him. That makes it sort of underwhelming as well. Even though, it sounds really OP, generally it's actually only an advantage offensively if the person you're fighting is roughly as strong as you are. So when Dio is fighting Jotaro, this is a super relevant ability because they can hurt each other. And it totally matters that you're given as much time as you want to launch your attacks or defend yourself from there. But it does have some offensive potential, unlike invulnerability or regen or something like that. So I'm putting it at the top of E. Next up, we've got time travel. And again, to distinguish it from battlefield removal through time and age manipulation, and taking time travel to mean going back in time to defeat somebody when they're young in time, and I prevent you from ever being born. For instance, I stop your parents meeting. This is an unusual thing to be resistant to. Generally, the only way to deal with it is to also have time travel, but some characters have what's called time paradox immunity, which means that their present self isn't affected by the things that have happened to them in the past. And, Bobobo is like this. I'm sure there are others that are like this as well. I'm pretty sure Superman has displayed this in the Silver Age before as part of some Legion of Superheroes stuff. It doesn't work on Time Trapper, for instance. You can do whatever you want to Time Trapper's past self. Time Trapper's always there at the end of time. And so, there is a special set of characteristics that allows people to avoid it. And it's also in this weird spot in that having time travel means that time travel doesn't work on you, which isn't true for many of these others. I mean, having existence erasure doesn't mean it's not going to work on me. Having the ability to seal people away doesn't mean that I'm in trouble if I'm not in trouble if I don't get sealed away. And so I think it goes pretty squarely into A. You can also use time travel to avoid attacks. If you can go back in time, then the attack misses you. If you travel forwards in time, the attack, you're not there to be hit by the attack. So that's some other niche uses as well. And last but not least, we've got transmutation or petrification here. Most famous example of this ability is Medusa turning you into stone. But some characters can, for instance, turn you into a doll or turn you into an egg or soap or whatever. And, if you get turned into an egg, that's, you're done. The only thing you're going to be is an omelette at that point, and I don't think that that's very helpful in a fight. So it is an instant win. Again, it's another one of those weird abilities, like mind control, like being possessed, where sometimes characters it doesn't work on them through sheer willpower or something else, or something hard to explain about them being strong or just resilient enough. Gogeta is like this. Boo turns him into candy, and he isn't weakened by it. He's still able to fight. Bobobo was able to resist being petrified by instead turning into a carrot. Stuff like that, exists. But if it works, it's an instant win. I think it's pretty comparable to some of these other ones here, like mind control. Like I said, it's quite similar to mind control. One of those weird ones that lots of people end up resisting. Anyway, that's it for the video. I hope you all enjoyed and you were willing to put up with my rambling about this. I hope this was interesting, and I hope that it sort of sparks a bit more introspection about the way that versus matchups happen, about how these who would win situations happen, about how power scaling works. Because I think it's more intricate and complicated than people give it credit for, and it's fun to think about the different situations that these abilities affect each other in, and what they're weak to, and who they would work on, and what facts about somebody's life mean that they wouldn't work on you. Like, being a robot means poison doesn't work on you. Being a god who was never an infant and doesn't get old means age manipulation doesn't work on you. And I just think these things are interesting. And I hope that you all found them interesting as well. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.